11th, 2001. What happened that day? I was crossing the Atlantic by air on 9/11. I was in a flight out of Paris, heading for America, and on my satellite phone, I was talking from the seat of my aircraft, I was talking to my office in London. And they said, "Robert, we have a big article by you tonight. We cannot run it because a plane has hit one of the World Trade Centers." Then another plane, so I knew this was not an accident. Then they told me a helicopter had hit the Pentagon. Then they said it was a jet. Then they said that another plane had crashed in Pennsylvania. And I know many of the crews on the transatlantic flights because I fly on them so many times. So I went up to the purser and said, "I think I'd better talk to your captain. He needs to know this." And he came straight up and he said, "Robert, qu'est-ce que ça va?" I said, "Listen, 2 planes on the World Trade Center, 1 on the Pennsylvania, 1 on the Pentagon." And it was the stewardess who said, "Where did they come from?" And at that stage, we didn't know this plane started in America. They could have come from Africa, Europe, Latin America. And of course, the steward, who's a friend of mine, said, "Robert, they could be on this plane." I said, "Yes, they could indeed." So he and I went round the aircraft together, looking for passengers we didn't like. Now, of course, most of them were Muslims, weren't they? Anyone who had a worry bead, anyone who was reading a Quran, anyone who had darker skin or brown eyes, or who was looking suspiciously at Mr. Robert, because Mr. Robert was looking suspiciously at them. I came back to business class and I said, 13, 4 in business class. The steward said 14, 2 in business class. And I realized that within a matter of minutes, Osama bin Laden, and I was sure it was Osama bin Laden because I had met him 3 times, he had turned nice, liberal Robert into a racist. I was looking for Muslim passengers on my aircraft, immediately. What was interesting, my plane turned round in mid-Atlantic when America closed its airspace to all aircraft, including their own. When I got back to Europe, the phone began to ring in my pocket, my mobile, like a budgergo. All the usual suspects. NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, the BBC, Al Jazeera, of course. I like Al Jazeera, by the way. Some of you will not like Al Jazeera. I like Al Jazeera. And always the questions were the same. Who and how? But never why. That's strange. Who? Well, 19 men who called themselves Muslims, most of whom were from Saudi Arabia, 1 from Lebanon, 1 from Egypt, none at all from Afghanistan, but of course Afghanistan was bound to be the target. How? Box cutters, tall buildings, aeroplanes. But why? This was a forbidden question. When I was on a program, radio program, that night, with an American professor who shall remain nameless, it was Alan Dershowitz, actually. The moment I said, "Why don't we ask the question, why?" he said, "To ask the question, why, is pro-terrorist, anti-American, and anti-Semitic." I don't know why it should be anti-Semitic, but that was a mystery he didn't tell us. But you see, we weren't supposed to ask the question, why? Now, let's speak frankly. The first thing a cop does on the streets of Washington, London, New York, Erbil, Baghdad, the first thing a cop does when he sees a crime is look for a motive. But when we had a massive crime against humanity, the one thing journalists were not to do was to look for a motive. Why? Why not? Because to look for a motive, we would have to discuss the Middle East, relations between America and Israel, between the Arabs and America. And this was not a subject to be discussed. What I'm trying to explain to you is the way in which there are all kinds of question marks over certain subjects which journalists will not raise. I continued to ask why? Of course I did. I made myself less and less popular. That night on the BBC, because I'd asked why in the newspaper, I was called the bad joke of the century. Because I'd asked why. Which is a question we all debated privately, but not in the press or on television. Well, I did, but kind of a minority. This raises all kinds of questions, basically about the role of the press